Hello, everybody. This is Rich, and you are watching. We're watching This Imaginary Life. That's what it's called. This is kind of like car talk, except instead of two old dudes who laugh at their own jokes, I bring on a bunch of friends and cohorts within the hobby of tabletop RPGs. We've got dozens of years of experience, and other people here who know more, talking about their experiences at the table. Now, what we love to do is answer questions from you, but in lieu of that, we're going to converse about villains. So we have questions and answers on. So if you're watching right now and you've got something going on at your table and you'd like some people who have a lot of experience who want to talk with you, then feel free to pose a question. Otherwise, we're going to talk about villains and I'm going to go ahead and bring on the other people now. So I'm going to start alphabetically. We have Jim McClure. Jim, you're going to be announcing kind of this new show thing you're doing. Why don't you tell us about this show that you're involved in, Jim?
Yeah, well, I've done enough random podcasts with other people, even a lot of people on this particular panel, and I was like, I guess I should actually start doing my own thing. So there's starting September 1st is going to be our launch date. It is Talking Tabletop, which is an interview series with myself and a notable personality, and every week we will have a new notable personality within Tabletop. And it's us having sort of very much a candid discussion. It's not so much a talking about a product or the series they're doing, but it's me getting to know the person. And as a matter of fact, again, one of the people on this panel will be on our show, the illustrious Cat Cool. But this will launch, like I said, September 1st. The show will be Talking Tabletop, and hopefully everyone will enjoy it. On top of that, of course, I'm a big fan of tabletop role-playing games. I'm known as that L5R guy because I'm a big L5R fan, and for once I'm on a panel with another L5R fan, and that makes my heart happy. But yeah, that's me, and I'm so excited to talk about villains because I'm a self-described antagonist in a world full of protagonists, so we finally get to talk about my little section of the world. So happy to be here, Rich.
Cool. Jim, question about Talking Tabletop. Is this tabletop RPGs? Are you going to cover board games, card games, anything on a tabletop?
A little bit of everything. It's going to be mostly our RPG focused, but we're going to talk a little bit else. I've got John Zinzer, the CEO of AEG, is going to be on the show as well, and of course we're going to sort of discuss everything on that because AEG kind of does everything. So mostly RPG focused, but a little of everything else. Some literature, some anime, whatever the people feel like talking about. We kind of vary.
Wait, how does anime fit onto a tabletop? So you have to put the DVD on, the Blu-ray on the...
Exactly what we do.
So you started with a focus, and you're already expanding past... Crazy.
It's all about story. It's all about story.
Okay, fine. All right, so now we're going to move on to the illustrious Cat Cool.
Oh, God, please don't call me that.
Dang it, he said it. He totally... Kat is part of the One Shot Network with the One Shot podcast, and she runs campaign. By the way, Kat, I just want to let you know, campaigns where she's running a campaign, surprise, of Star Wars Edge of the Empire. Just started a Star Wars Edge of the Empire Game Over Hangouts. I introduced some people to that podcast. One of them's already 24 episodes in.
Wow. I'm glad that you're playing a game. How are you finding the system?
It's okay. You roll some dice, you stare at them for a few minutes, then you go... Yep. Yeah, I think it means this. Let's go with that. All right, let's keep playing.
Interesting. Well, thanks for having me on.
Cool, awesome. And then next we have Lowell Francis, a buddy of mine who's on Play on Target, and he does all kinds of introductory YouTube videos you should totally check out because it's super useful. We just played a game of Microscope earlier today. Lowell, it was amazing because you're such a great facilitator of games. So I'm super excited to have you on. How are you doing, Lowell?
I am doing just fine, Rich.
Fantastic. Oh, by the way, Lowell's blog was nominated for an Emmy. So congratulations.
But didn't win, but at least was nominated.
Oh, congrats.
So.
Your list is good.
Yeah, it was an honor to be nominated. I mean, there are very few who get nominated, and so that's important, man. I was not my podcast Cannon Puncture was nominated for a Diana Jones Award I don't know 12 years ago. Still important. Still important. So you can hold on to that forever. No one can take it. I will.
Desperately cling to it.
You should. You should make a badge. Make your own badge. Stick it on the blog. I don't know. Okay, Strash Achivovich. How are you doing, Strash?
Doing pretty good. I have to apologize ahead of time. I've got a very over. This guy keeps bumping against the computer. I'm doing well.
Strash is currently designing a Jaeger kind of not beer, a Jaeger like giant mech fighting game that's in playtest. There's a lot of excitement for it. What's the name of this game you're working on, Strash?
It's called Atlas Reckoning. It is actually kind of a Pacific Rim style. My roommate is throwing up horns. It is a Pacific Rim style game. You play pairs of pilots that pilot giant mechs, and they fight, massive monsters from, you get to decide from where. It's pretty awesome. It's doing well. I just went through a pretty heavy iteration, so Beta 3 is going to be coming out here pretty soon, which means that pretty soon it might be more widely available than just a few select playtesters.
Nice. Now you're an indie gamer, so this is a Powered by the Apocalypse game?
No, actually it's not. It uses a custom system. You play with some playing cards and stuff. There are certainly things.
Hold on. Indie gamers don't come up with custom systems anymore unless they have a Patreon. Come on.
I guess I'm just a rebel. It might be a side effect of working with an Italian designer as well on this. So just a shout out to Giacomo. But yeah, it's it is definitely not PBTA, but it's got some stuff that of course you can maybe relate. Like it's got archetypes which are kind of like classes, so I suppose you could call them playbooks. I don't know.
That's right, because there's no such thing as classes before
right, exactly how it works.
I'm glad that Vincent taught us that one because we were clueless. Everybody was generic like GURPS. So Strash, good luck on your impending Kickstarter because you're making a game, so that has to happen. All right, excellent. So now we go into the part where we all talk about what we're into. Everybody gets 90 seconds. We're timed that way. If somebody blathers on like me, then we get cut off at some point. So we'll open this up. Popcorn. Who wants to go first with 90 seconds? We have Jim. I think you've got the timer. All right. So Jim's got the timer on. So don't be nice. 90 seconds. Cut them off.
I will do a buzzer sound.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. We need an app for that. So anybody ready to go with 90 seconds of amazing gaming stuff that you're into?
I can go.
Yes, step up.
Oh, no, but Kat had her hand up, so somebody actually raised their hand. So I'm going to defer to the hand raising.
That's not necessary. You can go.
No, in class, if you raise your hand, you get to go. Lowell's right.
Okay, fine. I'll take it. Are we ready? Tell me when. Someone give me a signal. Jim? Okay, I'm going. So the first thing that's up, ValorCon is a new con happening in Chicago, October 16th to 18th. The One Shot crew is all going to be there. Something exciting for me that's going to happen there is Improv Star Trek is a group here, and they are challenging our crew to an Artemis starship off. So that should be a really fun live event that I'm really looking forward to. Also, that con is held by awesome people. The other thing relevant to the show we're doing tonight, I am currently working on an Evil Party offshoot of the campaign podcast that I do. So I'm learning Force and Destiny for that, which is a great book if you guys picked it up at Gen Con. I'm really enjoying it so far. Other than that, I've actually been looking at systems to run Jaeger-type stuff. I've been looking at Tears of Machine. I've been looking at things that are like powered by intimacy. So Strash, please get me your system, especially before it kickstarts, so that we can get it up on the show. That sounds
no problem.
Do I have any more time left? Other than that, I've been into a bunch of JRPGs, so Golden Sky and Tenra Bansho Zero. So if anybody has translations or places where I can get others, I've been going down a list trying to put together something for the one-shot stuff that we're doing. And that, hopefully, is around time. Yeah? Huh? Oh no! Games are good!
Double Cross is another translated over from Japanese game.
Yeah, that's one it was on my my birthday present list and no one got it for me.
Ryutama just put out its final PDF version.
Thank you.
Even though the print is still ongoing. And if you were at Gen Con last year, I know that the same crew that was doing Ryutama, Kitkowski and his cohort are also doing I think it's Shinobi Schools, where you play like schoolyard ninjas.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's actually
Got
pretty
it.
fun.
Thank you.
Nice, nice, nice. So who wants to go next?
Well, I guess I'll go now.
You'd raised your hand low. You could have gone.
I could have done that. 90 seconds on the clock? Confirmed?
On the clock.
The thing we did today, Rich and I, we've done a two-part microscope session modifying that to do city building. Essentially, I got a group of people together. We built a city for VirtuaCon for RPG Geek that's coming up in the latter part of October. And we're going to get a whole bunch of GMs to run in this created city. And I'm going to do, I think, 3 sessions, 3 different games. So that should be fun. I am hacking a couple of Powered by the Apocalypse stuff there for Wushu and Alchemy games that I'm trying to get done. But right now, I'm still trying to figure out the second stage of this 3-forged design piece that I got. Mine was terrible, and this one I got is much better. And I feel bad for the person who got mine now. But it's a real interesting challenge to do that. I'm also working on hacking for the Crimson Skies thing that we're coming up in our ongoing campaign. The section of that for my wife's requested part of that. So bunch of stuff I'm doing on work. And I went to Gen Con and had a really good game and a really bad game. So there we go. I defer my comment to the next person.
I will not beep early.
Okay.
I promise you that.
So, Jim, on this show that you start, you're going to talk a little bit about dead air. I'm just saying that you should get that out.
I have been doing nothing but editing for like 3 hours. My brain's burnt on it. So yes, dead air is the enemy. But no, you tell me 90 seconds, I'm sticking to it. And I guess speaking of 90 seconds, is it my turn to talk now? I guess as I'm talking.
If you want, I just wanted to say that if you've edited enough, like I can draw the waveform of what an looks like.
Yes. Okay, well, I guess it's me, and I've started my own counter now. So I kind of talked a little bit about, of course, Talking Tabletop is the new show that I'm doing, which is coming up soon, that I'm really, really excited for. I was at Gen Con 2 weeks ago, had played in some fantastic games, played in some not-so-fantastic games, and that's the wonderful experience that is tabletop. And it was an absolute heck of a lot of fun. The other big thing that I want to talk about, because I kind of already got a chance to talk about Talking Tabletop, is in November here in Cincinnati, Ohio, is a Catacon, and this is another brand new con that I am personally like bouncing up and down excited about, because I'm kind of getting to call it the L5R Super Show, although I've been told I'm not allowed to call it that anymore. But we are going to have Sean Carman, who's been the head writer of Legend of Five Rings for the last decade there. We are going to have John Wick, the original creator of L5R there, and it's going to be the first time that they ever get to meet, together with myself. The whole crew that did the L5R one-shot for the One-Shot podcast are going to be doing part 2, as well as a whole just crap load of other games that are going to be there. So it is going to be a massive weekend. And on top of that, well, we've got Rich Baker's coming to it. Robert Schaub's going to be there. And there's a maximum attendance of 150 people, and it only costs $35, and it's on Kickstarter right now. So you cannot get a better deal with more people. So and it's not even my thing. I'm just going to be there. And so I'm really excited about it. The guys at the RPG Academy are putting that together. So I'm super, super excited. Beep! But I still had more time. Beep!
Wow, that was weird. that con sounds really neat. 150 people. That's it?
That's it. That's all the venue can hold. Yep.
You turn people away at that point.
Absolutely.
If only Gen Con had thought of that. Now they're up to 61,000.
They should have kept it at 150. That's the magic number.
They could have gotten 150 really good people with that sample size.
No one else, but all the good ones.
Yeah. It'd basically just be the talent. They wouldn't even have attendees. All right, Strash, between me and you. You want me to go?
I can go.
All right.
Say when.
When?
All right, great. So I went to a con on a whim today. There was a small local con called Malcon. It was nearby. It was about 30 minutes away from me. We only found out about it through like the Envoy program, and I decided to go and check it out on this weekend, and my best friend came with me, and we took a little trip there. It's only about 200 to 300 people, but it was really warm and welcoming. There was lots of cool people in cosplay. I got to play some board games. This is gonna make everyone laugh. I am such an indie gamer. It's the first time I ever played Savage Worlds, and I had a pretty good time. So that was cool. Aside from that, yeah, I've been kind of heads down working on AR. The beta 3 is eating up a lot of my time because some people actually want to run it at some local cons, so I'm trying to get enough of a text together like that it's not just in my head and being run on a table. I want to actually get people, trying it out. Aside from that, just doing my usual, playtesting a lot of games, testing some more Blades in the Dark, looking at Unknown Armies 3, just a whole bunch of stuff in the pipeline. I've been playing some local designs, Arcadia, which is kind of a English, I'm always going to get it wrong. I think it's not Georgian, it might be Edwardian, but it's like I don't know, it's a very society game. And also we've been playing Piece of Work, which is a cyber noir game. Oh no, I'm out of time!
And the music starts playing. Da 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 da.
Oh man, you got to play it off. All right, I'm ready to go. Jim, are you ready, sir?
By your lead, sir.
All right, I'm just going to talk about the games that I'm currently playing or running. Over Hangouts, I just ran Lady Blackbird, and I'm going to be running a second game of Lady Blackbird for a completely different group because two people I know have never played it, and I have to cure that. I'm playing a Dungeon World game weekly that's about to switch over. The same group is going to be playing Monster Hearts. I'm playing in a Star Wars Edge of the Empire game, which is a game that Kat knows very well. I'm in an Interest B game that Lowell is running. I'm in a Masks playtest, which, by the way, is powered by the Apocalypse Teen Superheroes game. About to jump into a Blaze in the Dark miniseries. We're currently on hiatus, but about to pick back up Sword of the Crown and the Unspeakable Power, which is powered by the Apocalypse doing Game of Thrones game. I'm about to resume the Camp Myth game that I'm running for my wife and son. I'm in a Fall of Magic game that's just about to end up. That game plays really well over Hangouts. And also I have a play-by-post few games. I'm currently running an Apocalypse World game for 7 players. That's with the 2nd edition playbooks and some of the basic moves that someone snagged, even though they're not official. I'm in a Fate game as well as an Apocalypse World game for Star Wars, which is amazing and more fun than Star Wars Edge of the Empire. Rules-wise, sorry. Storium is a play-by-post system, and I am putting 3 of those games and 2 more Apocalypse World games as well. So it's Apocalypse World. That's all the games that I'm playing. All right. That's,
can I ask a question about your heads-up stuff?
Yeah.
I'm just morbidly curious. How do you guys do the Fall of Magic is played with that gorgeous map? Do you just have like an extra screen for it, or how do you guys do that over Hangouts?
So one of the backers who has the beta, or in Europe they would call the beta PDF, he loaded that up as a drawing in Google. In the Google Drawing, and then created little tokens, and then he has actual little text box character sheets for us across the bottom with corresponding colors to the tokens, and we just move them along within the piece, frame our scenes, and go. It works really well. Didn't have to pay $75, so that's kind of good.
I have a question about Star Wars. Do you not like cinematic play? What is it about the mechanics of I won't argue. I'm just really curious what's turning you off from the Fantasy Flight stuff, because for me it feels like the movie, and that's what I wanted out of a system.
I think that it can feel like the movie, very swashbuckly, heavy swing, lots of high action. So I don't disagree with that. The kind of Star Wars that appeals to me is the kind of grim and gritty, the idea of bounty hunters, Han Solo. So Apocalypse World works really well for that, for hard choices, and yeah, maybe it's not really Star Wars. I honestly think of it like taking Shadowrun and kicking out all the elves and magic and then squeezing it into Star Wars. Like we literally were on 13 for anybody who knows about the game. That will never happen, sadly. So maybe it's not really Star Wars, but it's like the kind of Star Wars that I really get into because I could give a shit about Jedi. Really, I don't care.
Okay.
So it's 2 totally different tones of game, but they both exist in a giant universe called Star Wars.
Yeah, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Just every game that has no Jedi and is Star Wars makes me happy, and it does it well. All right, so villains, because it's Jedi to villains, it makes perfect sense to me. So let's talk about villains. So this is 5 really talented and experienced game masters, and I'm sure that villains are an important part of game stuff. So let's talk about, first of all, why Tilda Swinton is the best villain of all time, and really that's the high mark for me. Any disagreement? Like, if you can't make Tilda Swinton into a villain in your game, or find a cool picture of Tilda Swinton to be a villain in your game, no arguments.
Beyond Snowpiercer, what are the other Tilda Swinton villains?
Chronicles of Narnia. She was the White Queen.
Iconically, Gabriel and Constantine to me.
Thank you. That was the next place I was going. Absolutely. Yeah, there's 3 right there.
Also, if you watch Snowpiercer, also I actually have a big list. I'm sorry, I'm a Tilda Swinton fan.
Dude, go! I lit off, and then we'll get into real stuff.
We're okay. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Tell us actually why these characters are really significant to you. Challenge.
No, Tilda Swinton is a great villain because she's excellent because she looks so different from your typical mustache twirling characters. Her androgyny look, the fact that she's able to carry so many different personas, and you can just pick any different movie and you can find a completely different Tilda Swinton because she's so deep into the role, and it's really amazing. That was a horrible lead off. That was mostly for Jen Martin because she and I have like a Tilda Swinton thing, and I now Strauss, you're in the club. So what are villains good for? And we'll kind of popcorn this out, tease it out. What do you guys use villains for primarily? Jim, you looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of villains. As I said at the beginning, I hold myself. I'm an antagonist in a world full of protagonists. I've always loved villains. Villains, from a traditional media standpoint, and in tabletop it's a little bit different, but in a traditional media standpoint, I always liked the villain because they got to do stuff. They were proactive, where the heroes were much more reactive, and it always bothered me to a degree, and I always found myself going more towards the villains. You know, I think, and we mentioned animation. I've got to talk anime at the beginning. Dragon Ball Z, for all those who are anime fans. You know, the hero sat on Earth and trained for a year, while Vegeta and Nappa are coming to Earth to kick ass. They're going to go do something, and they were much more interesting characters. And then you get shows like Gundam Wing. You know, if we get away from the anime side of it, Tywin Lannister is one of the greatest villains ever put on the screen. Papa Lannister is an amazing villain, and really, of course, the villain is there to be our antagonist, our counteractive force to the good people. They are what caused the friction, they are what caused the strife, they are what makes story progression interesting, and in my personal belief, they are what needs to be the obstacle to overcome that gives us finale and gives us that sense of epicness from storytelling. So that's my take on villains from a whole concept, if you will.
Kat, what about you? Oh, go ahead, Josh.
So I think that something that's important to either think about or acknowledge, again, I come from a more story-oriented approach. For me, villains are not obstacles to be overcome. Or those are 2-bit villains. We're talking about like henchmen or something. Those are fine obstacles. But I think that an important role of villains is to actually challenge the beliefs of the players and characters, because the ones that are most memorable are usually the ones that reflect exactly what the players believe, but are twisted just a little bit. Like everybody knows like the dime a dozen megalomaniacal, cackling evil, whatever, scientists, etc. But the ones that we truly remember are the ones that actually have causes that we can understand why they believe in, and they are the ones that ultimately will force us to confront ourselves and grow as people or make difficult decisions in order to understand why we fight them. You mentioned Gundam. I'm going to point out that a lot of the villains in some of the better Gundam series are actually not clear who the villain is, because initially there's 2 sides fighting and you're seeing the perspective of both of them, and you don't always know which one you're supposed to be rooting for, because there is truly admirable qualities in people on both sides, and oftentimes they reflect different ideals and whatnot. And of course everyone's going to have their favorite characters, but the heroes are not always shining good and the villains are not always, damnably evil. And it's just, I think that's really, to me, what makes for a good villain.
Yeah, I'm going to dovetail on that, Strash. I'm glad you brought up that point, because to me, when someone says villain, it definitely is a statement about the kind of game that you expect. When you say villain, that's a very strong thing. It's like, I'm going to punch Nazis in the face! That's your groove. Go for it. But I really like the villains that aren't necessarily villainous, at least in their mind. And if you look at it from a different viewpoint than just your character, you can see their logic. Lowell, you got something to add?
Well, I was going to say, I think that mirroring as a kind of hands-on technique when you're running is a really good thing. If you're finding a player is indulging in a particular negative trait, they're going down a particular negative line, one of the things you can do is a villain that expresses or goes further on that to sort of show that. I think that's important. And games where you have particular virtues or vices, L5R, where we have those codes of conduct, if a player buys into one of those strongly, showing what the extreme of that is a great way to do what Strauss says and explore that. And I think that mirroring, being really conscious about that when you're looking at who the players are and who are their mirrors, who are their dark sides, how do you bring that to the table?
I like that. I really like that. Kat.
Absolutely. I'm so excited that we're doing this. Oh man. Okay, so you mentioned something, Rich. You just said that that you're more interested in villains who don't think that they're villains, and I don't think a villain can be someone who thinks of themselves as a villain. That's an adversary. I think that there are lots of possible sources of conflict in games, and for me, that has nothing to do with being a villain. A villain instead is someone who will make your heroes heroic by making them have to make those decisions. By either being their mirror, by being a slightly more extreme version of them. I mean, there are so many different types, but there's this Greek idea of the nemesis, who is someone who will be the source of retribution if your hero strays from their path, right? So if they succumb to hubris, if they do anything like that. And that's kind of what I love villains to be. They're people who will come down hard when players make the bad decision for their character, and give them the chances to push a hero into a heroic place. Yeah, they're pretty neat.
Let's stick with you, Kat, because you've got this evil thing that you're doing, and I imagine that's just basically people playing villains. So what appeals to you for that?
Oh,
what are you looking at?
So I am using villains already established on the show, within campaign. It's the same universe that I'm telling. For people who don't listen to the campaign podcast, it is a long-running actual play set in the Star Wars Edge of the Empire system in the 20-year gap between the prequels and the original movies, and follows a really dumb group of individuals kind of cobbled together in the ship called the Minoc. They've already run into several characters who are their foils. And all of these people work for the Empire. So the evil party is following those characters. And obviously part of what I find interesting about that is that none of these people think of themselves as villains whatsoever, and all have fairly legitimate viewpoints within the universe. So it's a way to showcase stuff happening on the other side of the camera in Star Wars, because I think there's a lot more there than just good and evil at play. Yeah, I don't really like Jedi all that much either, but I don't think Star Wars likes Jedi. When we're being real about it, Star Wars kind of disassembles Jedi because black and white doesn't work. So
Fair
anyway,
point.
so that's what I'm doing with that. It's a complex thing, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's about the foils of the characters being the foils of the characters.
I just hope that all the games aren't everyone sitting around a table eating and complaining about Lenik and Bacta. That'll only work for so long.
if they're as incompetent as the Minot crew, I mean, that's all it's gonna be. That's out of my hands at the end of the day.
No, it's clearly going to be them sitting around the table doing their fingers like this and sending the monster of the week at the party every single time.
Oh man, I'm scrapping all of my plans. That's what we're doing now. We're also going to try to catch that darn Vorn scare every week.
So we talked about nemesis versus villain. Is there anything more to tease out of that? Any more ideas around what makes a good nemesis versus a good villain?
Well, there's that idea of turns from wrestling, of the good characters turning to be heels, and about that sort of playthrough. I know John Wick makes a lot about that in his writings, and then Worldwide Wrestling builds a lot on that. But that I'm not as familiar with that, but I know that that's a major technique.
Oh, and now I can't even be quiet anymore because the man dropped L5R and wrestling, and of course I am a huge WWE fan, and the reason I like WWE I end up talking about a lot is because two really big reasons. One, it is storytelling through combat, which is a panel for another day, but it does it so incredibly well. And the other thing is it's all building up to fight a villain or a nemesis or whatever the case, depending on what the storyline is, and everything that they do in the setup is to come to this one climactic situation, if I could speak today, where these two fight each other in combat with everything that they have. And one of the things I love about wrestling as a tabletop system is on top of the fact that you get to have this big build-up and you get to have this combat with your villain, you can't die. That person is still at the show the next week. That villain is still there doing villainous things the next week, even if you beat them or if you lost to them. And so you mentioned wrestling, so I had to jump in with my thing of I actually really do like how wrestling handles villains. It does it in a very black and white sort of way. I do wish it was a little bit more nuanced, but that being sort of what's needed for the media. But it does bring up an interesting discussion when we're talking about villains and we've kind of hinted around this of in tabletop, what you guys run, I'm sort of curious about this. Do you run a lot of villains that are black and white? I am evil, you are good. I am bad, you are righteous. Or do we run a lot more of, I hate using the term shades of gray now, but shades of gray in between of whatever the case may be, that they are not so villainous, that they are I kind of use for the colloquial definitions antagonist instead of villain when I'm referring to that, even though it's not exactly technically right. But it seems more apt to describe. So I kind of wonder with you all, do you run traditional mustache twirling villains? Do you run more shades of gray? What do y'all do? For my own curiosity.
Can I jump in here?
Go.
All right, cool. So I'm going to answer Rich's question and in the process bring up what Jim was asking here. So, Rich, you asked the difference between a villain and a nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
And so a nemesis is character specific. They're somebody that hounds you, potentially reminding you of past sins. Maybe you had to make a terrible choice and you knew that some great evil was going to come up, but in the process of fighting that great evil, you burned down a village, and now somebody who has a beef with you is following you around. So like a nemesis is character specific and will draw out the story of a specific character. A good villain, and just a villain in general, can be somebody that asks you to raise yourself up to become a nemesis. So in essence, a good villain has a cause that you understand why somebody may believe in, but you need to stop actually doing what you're doing, on the side. Like, you're doing something on the side, and then you hear about what they're doing, and you're like, no, this is something that needs to be stopped, or this is something I need to face and confront, or who knows, even maybe join eventually. But like the point is that motivates you to become that character's nemesis. You go after them, and initially you're just like a minor thorn in their side, but eventually you become important enough that you get their full attention, right? So that's nemesis versus villain. And speaking of one of the things that Jim was asking, a lot of the villains that happen in my games tend to be coincidental. Like they're not set up to necessarily be villains. They just happen to be adversaries that then become that. So sometimes they're actually people on equal footing. Like if we're playing Blades in the Dark, rival thieves gangs are no more or less evil or cruel than our protagonists. But it's perfectly understandable why they do what they do. You just want their stuff. And two, like a great example, we were playing Piece of Work, which is a cyber noir game. I mentioned it earlier. And my character was actually I was playing a sentient AI that had escaped a lab, and my nemesis was actually the security chief at the place that I had left, and she was just doing her job. But in the process of doing her job, she needed to get a hold of me, and so in order to get a hold of me, she kept escalating her actions. And so the more I refused to confront her because I knew that it was going to cause casualties, the more it caused all the people around me to suffer. And eventually, there was no looking away anymore. I had to actually like put down my foot and actually be like, all right, we need to deal with this now. So that's an example of somebody who was my nemesis, and all she was doing was her job. She wasn't even evil. So and this wasn't like, she wasn't like some sort of horrible fascist doing something terrible in order to do her job. She was just literally like a cop pursuing what to her was a criminal. So yeah, lots of shades of gray in our games. And definitely not so much with the mustache twirling.
I like to, as a trick sort of related to that, to get that connection to the players, put forward two solid, really interesting NPCs they interact with during the course of a session, and by the end of the session it becomes clear that these two NPCs have radically different motivations, radically different things, agendas that they want, and that eventually the players have to make a choice between them, and knowing that they're creating essentially a future villain, a future adversary for themselves, even as they're sort of making a choice on who the ally is.
I found that in a lot of my games, my characters become villains mostly because they're in charge. If you put someone who's an NPC in charge and they're competent, they magically become a villain. I don't even get it. For example, in the Apocalypse World game, I thought it would be interesting to have a relatively level-headed hardholder who was hard, but not necessarily like vindictive or totally a dick. He actually had his stuff together. All of a sudden, he's a villain. Like they're kibitzing between the player characters. This guy's the worst. We have to take him down. I'm really close to getting advanced. I'm going to become the next hardholder. And I'm like, this is amazing. I think it's because he's competent. I don't know. It blows me away. It's very amusing. Any other? I think Nemesis villain. We covered that really well. But Kat, I wanted. Do you use villains often?
Oh, I use villains all the time. I freaking love villains. I was gonna say, one, you brought up something interesting there that I want to touch on quickly. I tend to pre-plan my villains, and then I'll have characters that are adversary, like that the party genuinely just like brings up on their own, as you're saying, that like someone that you're not thinking of as a villain, that they've turned into one. I want to know what everyone kind of thinks about that. So if we can put a pin on that on the side, that things that you didn't plan on being villainous are really interesting to me, because again, for me, for the most part, if anything is a villain, a lot of planning has been put into that. I'm a story gamer, so I'm trying to tell a specific narrative with any villain. The one time that I do, like, evil twirly mustaches villains is not that. It's a different type of thing. It's a monster. I freaking love monsters, and I don't think that they ever think of themselves as evil twirly, but it does set something up against the party that is kind of like, well, clearly there is a conflict of interest here, and they're only ever going to be able to think of that thing as a mustache twirly villain, whether that's like a bear attacking the party or up to like a fey queen. That there's a different type of interaction with monstrous villains. I think that's very interesting.
Cool,
So, but
cool.
back to my pin, I really wanted to hear what others thought about things that you didn't mean to be villainous.
Okay, I guess I got one. it's not a great example, but I guess it'll work. Because it was behavior that a character did which came off as the most villainous thing ever, even though this person was intended to be a villain all along. At this time, he wasn't, and it was my favorite villain that I've ever created, Agasha Funakoshi, Void Shugenja for my L5R fans. And he started out as a member of the party. I got to play once. One of the other characters took over and GM for a couple sessions, and I knew I wanted to work this villain because he was going to be the overarching thing into the group. So he was sort of shoehorned into the group by Imperial Edict, and we were going to go do a thing. And at this point, he was fine. He was a little weird, but Void Shugenja are weird. And we were walking our first day into this woods to do an investigation, and it was like mid-afternoon, and all of a sudden my Shugenja just says, "Nope, I'm done traveling for the day. We stay here." And everyone went, "What?" And he went, "I'm done. I'm tired. I'm not a warrior like you. We stay here. But we still have travel to do." "Nope, I'm setting up camp. As a matter of fact, you need to set up your camp for me because I'm the dignitary." And him deciding to arbitrarily stop 2 hours early made him the most villainous thing in this entire world. Everyone hated this man. If he ate crackers, they would sit there and go, "Look at that guy, is sitting there eating crackers." I mean, they hated everything about him because he decided to stop for some arbitrary amount of time. And I think the result is because he chose something that was selfish, that wasn't for the party, and that would be the narrative thing to say. But I just found it funny as I was just going, he's going to be a little contrary, but that was the linchpin. There's nothing else I could have possibly done to set him up more evil than I'm going to stop the party 2 hours earlier from traveling.
Okay, so there's silence, so I'm now going to tell my villain story. So this goes way back. I was running a Vampire the Masquerade game, and anybody who's following me on Google Plus saw that it lasts for a long time. There was a guy who was playing a Glasswalker werewolf. I'm going to try to make this layman term, but there's some of it. So he came up with a 2-point villain in his background. It was one of his flaws. He had a 2-point villain. But when he wrote this guy up, he said that he had like a 5 intelligence. There's only 5 dots possible. 5 intelligence. So I started kind of playing this villain just like as his nemesis type thing. But then he keeps saying, "Rich, this guy's really, really super smart, and he's totally got it in for me." And they're like, okay. A month later, when the Mendez had convinced that Glasswalker's kinfolk, like his own buddy who doesn't have the ability to turn into a werewolf, that the fact that the werewolf character was running around with a bunch of vampires was a bad thing, and so his kinfolk buddy was chasing after him with the electro gun that they had just left lying around after a mission, and he got mad at me. He's like, "Why is my own kinfolk coming in?" Because Mendez talked to him, but he has a 5 intelligence, Hank. What did you expect? He talked him into it, and he found your thing, and he did the thing. These are all just crumbs you're leaving me. You handed this to me. Isn't this what you wanted? But he's only a 2-point villain. That was one of my first villain stories where I actually pushed hard enough for a player to go, Uncle. Horror stories.
I have to agree with what Rich said about authority figures, that there is that strong sense of players that they hate authority, which is why in a lot of more recent games I've made them authorities. But Changing the Lost is a really strong example of that. Both campaigns I've run of that, players have come out of the hedge, and immediately they assume whoever is in charge of the court, they must be awful, they must be evil bastards, we hate them even though they're helping us, even though they're clearly setting up the structure to protect everybody. It's the weirdest thing to have to work into my calculations. Is they're going to assume there is a bad guy, they're going to assume these people are evil, and it's so weird in all this stuff. But I'll say that the other thing that I have happened more often than things becoming villains, is players hooking on to people that I've set as villains and putting all their attention, my wife putting all of her attention to convert them over to her cause. And I would say the majority of it is villains that I put out there that I love, that the players work hard to bring over to their side, which is, I think, a good thing. It may be frustrating for me, but there's certainly a concrete sense of accomplishment there, switching that direction.
People praising characters that are very similar to the characters in the party for just liking them more will instantly turn them into villains. It's kind of hilarious. So if you have somebody who's a ship captain and they have a tough run, they get boarded or something, and then they land, and you have another ship captain, and everyone's like, "Wow, you're awesome, and we like you, and we want to hire you for a job. We think you're better than this party dude." Instant villain. Happens every time.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Do we have any other villain stories we want to throw out about Mustache Twirl? Oh, Kat's got some. Good. Go.
Okay, I tend to not be hit with people. I guess like they get annoyed with NPCs that I didn't intend to be villains, but it typically doesn't get to that level. But the opposite, the trying to convert a villain, that happens constantly. And my first getting people to like call in uncle on a villain was such a simple thing. It was like a first session in a 1 to 20 introductory Pathfinder thing that I was running in college. Session 1, there was an imp who was antagonizing the party just as a part of just being an imp, that he wasn't a big deal. They were supposed to kill him. And the paladin, our lawful good paladin, decided that he was going to befriend this imp and then take him on as a minion. And tried to convince him that that wasn't a good idea, but then he spent build points on it, because since it was a 1 to 20 thing, we went pretty fast. So he had this imp following them around the entire time. And I just played an imp. So the imp completely played it straight, pretended that he was converted and this paladin's friend, helped the party along, but they kept not winning small victories along the way and just not putting together the steps, so that when they finally got to the final boss and the imp very obviously betrayed them and became a high-level devil, they were all just devastated and shocked that I would have done this to them. It's like, no, guys, it's a lawful evil thing that's trying to level up, and he does that by stealing these things from you very methodically. So yeah, I find that that's a super common thing. Parties love to take on villains and try to convert them. In fact, that's one of my favorite Gary Gygax campaign stories, that some of the iconic characters started out as low-level villains that the party takes on as minions, and then you're stuck with this NPC following the party around the entire time as they try to slowly convert it. But that's my story.
Nice. I like that. I like your imp. You said imp, it made me nervous. So, Lowell, you mentioned that there's something else you wanted to talk about villains?
Well, I'm wondering what people are doing in terms of, one of the classic things is the players want to get to the villain. And, the wrestling analogy is a good one, because there's the working up to get to the villains. But how are you guys handling sort of recurring villains that come back? What are your techniques to keep the players from getting frustrated with that process? I'm curious about that. And Kat raised her hand again.
Sorry, schools. It's in there hard. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay, so as I said before, I really like nemesis. So most of my villains, I want to come back, because I don't want them to be defeated unless that's actually showcasing something good about the villain and that storyline is conquered. So I tend to either outright tell the players or play in systems that support this thing, where it's like, you will defeat the villain whenever you run into them. You have to get them to go away for the most part, unless they beat you in this encounter. But you can't kill them. They will disappear until you do a thing good enough to kill them. And if the players know that going in, they try harder and do more interesting things each time to actually build up the story, so that when they finally defeat the villain, it feels like a giant victory. So them just knowing ahead of time that something's going to happen, and I'm not robbing them of the agency of, dropping someone to 0 hit points and then being like, but I killed him, allows me to plan a longer arc for the villain and show different steps along this hero's path.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in on that because I'm a big fan. We've talked about a couple things. I mean, one of the two points I want to make. One being system does matter, I feel, in this regard, especially if you want reoccurring villains. A system that allows you to directly fight a villain multiple times without the threat of death, or I should say the guarantee of death, really goes a long way to help this. There's a few notable examples. We already talked about wrestling, how it kind of handles it. Star Wars: Edge of the Empire. A notable person can essentially only die when the GM dictates it such. If I'm getting the rules correctly. L5R is another one that I really like. They have the concept of dueling to first blood is how you legally, determine the outcome of a dispute. So you get to actually fight full force, but it's one cut, and whoever hits is the victor, and that person is now still around. They're still doing what they're doing, but they've been engaged with and they've been defeated. One of the other tricks I use if you're doing a system that doesn't sort of support non-lethal combat as a regular part of the system is to build your villain in a way that the characters know they're a villain, but what they have is plausible deniability about what they are doing. If the villain is kind of a bad person and there's a cult going around that is just wrecking stuff, they get to fight and engage and beat this cult, and at the end of the day they get to show up and go, we beat the cult and now we're going to take down you, and he kind of turns to him and goes, oh great, you rid the city of them, good job, thank you. And they go, I want you to be evil and I want to kill you, but I know it was you, but I never saw you do anything. And their own conscience will most of the time prevent them from actually doing it. And then he shows up again. And then there's other bad stuff that's happening and they know it's him. And then they spend their time trying to link him, even though, again, if we're playing standard fantasy or whatever the case, they could just, run forward with swords and make it happen. If they don't feel right within their own mind, a lot of times they won't do it. So that's another thing that I do to try to get the reoccurring villain, is to allow them to directly conflict with the villain, but still have a way that it won't end in death.
Yeah, and I think that's really good, because one of the mistakes I made a lot early on was to keep the villain mysterious until the end. It's stronger if you pull the trigger on that reveal early on, so the players then have to deal with, okay, we know who the bad guy is, but how do we actually engage in conflict? How can we responsibly do that within the terms of the game world as it's set? And two other systems that use mechanical rewards, Mutants and Masterminds, that's one of the ways you get hero points back, is essentially the GM, the villain escapes. And I think that works well within the genre. And then, of course, Fate uses concessions as a way to mechanically reward that process.
I think also you can set it up in via plot. Like, a lot of times it's not important to necessarily hide a villain or like keep them mysterious, unless that's part of the story. Like if you're playing something like Warhammer, there's a lot of investigation, so you actually don't know who the villain is, because that's sort of the pretext for a lot of stuff. But I mean, if you are playing a game where the villain is obvious, particularly, and one of the things that for me, a lot of times I design a villain for a first chapter, and sometimes they become a villain that extends further, or sometimes I have to design a villain for further chapters that either reinforces or looks at different lessons than the ones that we encountered earlier on. But I think like a lot of systems, you can just it's not even about system, it's about story, right? Like, you're not gonna kill the evil enemy general by just making a couple of stealth checks and then just shivving them in the night. In general, like you kind of build up. You learn about a lot of the process is about, to go back to that wrestling analogy that somebody was throwing out earlier, sometimes you have to fight henchmen before you can get to the head honcho. So a lot of times you'll fight generals, you'll have to deal with plots that have an immediacy or an urgency, while seeking out ways to either find where the villain is or to how to encounter them in a scenario that actually allows for you to make a move. And I've seen some really interesting things come from this. I've seen a PC that actually started looking into the so-called villain and discovered they weren't necessarily very villainous, but by the end of it, he had kind of figured out that he disagreed with the strategy, but he ended up joining the other side. And he went into a scenario that was essentially like a no-win scenario, where he knew that the person was like surrounded by their troops and it was essentially suicide to do anything, and he just offed him anyway in order to prevent like things from happening. And he was just like, I'm okay with my character dying. I'm doing this thing. This is how I'm going to be known as I go out. And I was like, sweet. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think in general it's by structuring the story so that the villain isn't necessarily the person with the biggest sword who's at the head of the troops and just always yelling about their plan. It's somebody that they kind of learn about over time and have to deal with other things before they can get to them. They're not hidden. They're just, busy doing other things until they can get to them. So that's my bit of advice there.
Cool. I've got some anti-advice. So I hope you find it useful. So I'm going to draw an example from a very recent thing that happened in the Apocalypse World game that I'm running. So they're in the hold with the cool hard holder that I like. They decide is a villain, but there's another hold that is mostly a market, and it is just a few miles away. And they really have despised the guy who named Millions, who, by the way, is pretty much a dick. So he's kind of villainous in that he's just fat and happy off of all of his stuff. He's used to getting what he wants. So the Skinner, who's a very seductive type of character, of course, gets to sleep with him, but then she uses this power called Lost, and she summons in this crazy psychic character, is a brainer. And so the two of them have him, they have him dead to rights. And the player of the brainer says, I've got this advance that I've kind of, I was thinking long term that I want to be a hard holder, but I really like the idea of taking a hold here as my next advance. And I'm like, well, this is a villain. But damn, that's interesting. So, Millions is dead. There's no fight to it. Fictionally, they have set it up perfectly. The thing is, now, Vignette, the brainer, who's now the hard holder, now all of Millie's boys are like, okay, boss lady, what's up? She walks out. All the raider gangs who pretty much bring all of this stuff to market, who basically waylay their friends out in the out. This is where the money comes from to this place. All the jingle flows because they raid places. And they're like, where's Millions? I'm in charge now. Oh, really? That's interesting. Huh. So you're the villain now. That sounds great. So let's work out that same deal. Maybe I'll get a little bit more of a cut. And it transitioned from really obvious villain that everybody can hate to, wow, this is an entirely corrupt system that will get me a lot of money if I play along. But if I try to fix it, how's that going to work? Because these raider gangs are going to see that as weakness. And it's amazing to watch that transition and see that story that I never saw ahead of time. It was just, hey, Millions is kind of a dick because he's got lots of raider gangs, and they're going to hate on that. And so by putting crosshairs on that character in Apocalypse World, that's really where you want. And not protecting that villain in that fictional space where it made the most sense it would just, the result of it has been really awesome for me and a super cool story. Cool. So we've come up on an hour, and I think that it would be cool if anyone has any last advice on villains, any last thoughts, anything we haven't covered, or you want to reiterate. You just kind of go around the horn. I think Kat should go last because she raises her hand, and she's going to have the coolest thing to say anyway. So we need to end strong, is what I'm saying. So I'll go with my last advice, which is really just that. Villains are cool, but villains are not cooler than your player characters. And if you're holding back villains to the point where your players are frustrated, not antsy to come after the villain, but frustrated like, oh, him again, be careful, because you could really create a bad taste in their mouth. And I've done that. It's personal experience. So just be careful. If you are protecting your villain more than you're using it to highlight the heroes, the player characters, that's a problem. You just write a novel. Go, Jim.
I guess I should jump in because, well, you just, I think, stole my thing, Rich. For my piece of advice that I was going to say is essentially the same thing. A villain is there to showcase the players in a tabletop setting. That is the purpose of a villain, and that is something that my advice is to always keep that in the forefront of your mind, that the villain, the purpose, the whole reason they are in the narrative is to showcase the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful about the players. And everything that your villain does, all of his schemes, all of his plannings, how you build him, you should have that thought in your mind, because it is really easy to get lost every now and then. You create villains that you yourself personally love so much, and as a GM, a lot of times you're not getting to play as much as you should, and suddenly you want to have your special little child in the world, and you forget what narratively the purpose of that person is, which again is to showcase the players.
Very cool, Jim. Josh or Lowell?
I can jump in. So sometimes always be true to the system is the first caveat here. So if you're playing something like Danger Patrol, having a cardboard cutout, mustachio twirling villain, totally awesome. Do it. But most of the time, if you're planning long term and if you're looking at a party, the most important thing you can do when you make a villain is make them a real person. Don't make somebody, like, even if they are showcasing the beliefs and feelings of the players, make them three-dimensional. Because that will create an interface that the players will... I mean, sometimes players will just, pull out the gun, the axe, whatever, and just deal with it. They will use their violence on it. But in all seriousness, by making a living, breathing person, they become more interesting, they will fascinate the players, and they will be more memorable. So take the time to actually build them out a little bit, and don't just worry about their stat block.
Wait. Build them out or stat block are different things?
Yes, they are.
All right. Lowell, what about you, sir?
Well, I'll say actually most of my favorite villains and villainous stuff actually comes from a lot of the Hong Kong action flicks, and a lot of like the Chinese wushu TV series and stuff. Those are great places to go and look for villains that look one-dimensional on the surface, but are really deep when you get in, and you're getting lots of revelations throughout. And I recommend going to those. And there's a new book for Feng Shui too, that Blowing Up the Movies, where Robin Loss goes through a bunch of those films, and it's pretty good. It's a good read, and he analyzes a lot of that stuff.
Excellent. I look forward to reading Robin's movie recommendations. I like the Hong Kong action theater too. Kat, bring us home.
Okay. A question that I get asked a lot is, how do I make a villain cool without making them twee or have them step on the toes of the players? Which you guys already awesomely pointed out, you don't want them to do. You don't ever want them taking priority over your players. So something that I've learned from things like wrestling, it's a pretty easy technique that's really fun to do, is let your villain do a cool thing or two cool things, then let your player defeat that thing, then introduce a new element. Don't ever let there be more cool elements on the table than the player has a chance to figure out how to get past. An example of this, because Rich, you squinted at me. If your player has like a robo punch, showcase the robo punch, have it destroy your player. Next time they run into the villain, it's time for them to beat that robo punch. You don't showcase any new thing going on until they've done that and they can have that victory. That lets the villain be a cool evolving thing along with the party and lets them experience systematic growth. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Very cool. Thank you. Thanks, Kat. All right. Well, thanks to everybody. Jim, Kat, Lowell, Strash, I really appreciate all of you coming on so we could talk about villains. This was suggested by Lowell. So, Lowell, are you satisfied? Did we fulfill your
It was suggested because we botched the last time we tried to record this. That was my suggestion. I had made up notes, so I didn't want to lose my work, So I hate wasting effort on prep. So there we go.
Awesome. Cool. So if you are watching this and you said, oh, they didn't cover this thing, or if there's something going on at your table and you'd like some of these smart brains to talk about it, let us know. Come to the YouTube channel, the YouTube episode here, and let us know in the comments. or you can hit up me or any of us on Google+. I think some of these people do the Twitters, so there's that as well. And let us know if you have any questions about Jamie. We'll bring it and do a whole new episode of This Imaginary Life. It really exists on what we find interesting, but more important than that, if we do that car talk thing, we have to have people who talk about their cars, except the cars are RPGs. So, again, thanks, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed it, and have a great night.